Isaiah Fassett, born 1844, died 1946. Born of enslaved parents Andrew Fassett and Murray Bratton on the Brook Farm, Isaiah grew up in the Cinnapuxon area near Berlin, working on farm chores, growing crops, and cutting fuel logs, picking up carpenter skills that he would use later in his life. He had three brothers, Francis, John, and George, and three sisters, Rhoda, Hetty, and Sally. With a critical need for more soldiers, in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed a law that allowed free black men and slaves to serve in the Union Army. Free blacks were offered $300 to enlist. Slave owners were paid $300 for each slave that was freed to enlist. Reverend David and Jane Burdell tell us Isaiah and his three brothers were released from slavery on the condition that they enlist in the Union Army. Moreover, the United States government compensated the slave owner, Sarah Bruff, the sum of $300 per slave, for a total of $1,200. It was the decision of his slave owner for him to be a soldier in the Civil War, and he and his brothers received no compensation for their enrollment. The evidence of title Sarah Bruff signed on February the 16th, 1864 stated, Isaiah Fassett, who has been enlisted in the 9th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops, Company D, is my slave for life, that he was born my slave in the month of March on the 17th day, 1844, and I have not purchased said slave from any person or persons disloyal to the government of the United States, with the object of obtaining compensation for the same. The deed of manumission and release of service, signed by Sarah Bruff on March 28, 1864, released Isaiah Fassett from all service due me, his freedom to commence from the 11th day of November, 1863, the date of his enlistment in the 9th Regiment of Colored Troops in the service to the United States. The claimant's certificate signed by Sarah Bruff on February the 16th, 1864, claims compensation for Isaiah Fassett enlisted November 11th, 1863, at Berlin, Worcester County, Maryland, in the 9th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops, Company D. Isaiah served for 3 years, fighting as a private in the wilderness at Johns Island, South Carolina, July the 5th through the 7th, 1864, Deep Bottom, Virginia, August the 14th through 18th of 1864, Fussel's Mills, the storming of Petersburg, and early entry into Richmond. After Richmond fell, Isaiah was promoted to corporal, and in May of 1865, and sent to Texas, Cuba, and New Orleans. He mustered out at Green Village, Louisiana, and received his discharge on November the 26th, 1866. Berlin surveyor William D. Pitts tells us that Isaiah talked of the Crater Fight, the Battle of the Crater in October of 1864, the tunneling under the rebel earthworks, and the explosion. Ned Purnell said that just before they exploded the mine, they lined up Company D and told each to note who was on each side of him. Uncle Ned heard Uncle Isaiah cry out in pain. When they lined up after the fight, they called off Isaiah's name. Isaiah answered, dead. He really wasn't dead at all. He was only creased by a bullet, a flesh burn. Isaiah returned to Berlin after the war and worked as a carpenter. He married Sally Purnell on September the 5th, 1867. They had 8 children and 59 years together. Isaiah Fassett was an active member for many years in the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, an organization of Union Army veterans. He served as commander of the Berlin Post for the GAR and the last commander of the Delaware Post. In 1938, when he was 94, he attended the 75th Battle Reunion in Gettysburg. From that occasion forward, he proudly wore his veteran badge, presented to each of the 1845 Civil War soldiers present. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the Union and Confederate soldiers, saying, "All of them we honor," not asking under which flag they fought then, thankful that they stand together under one flag now. Isaiah received greetings from Franklin Roosevelt on his 100th birthday that he celebrated with family and the community. Isaiah died 2 years later at the age of 102 years, 3 months, and 3 days. He was the next to last Civil War veteran in Maryland when he died. A plaque in his honor is installed on the edge of the property of St. Paul United Methodist Church, which is also the location of his former home on Branch Street in Berlin. I do believe that in his latter years, Isaiah was proud of his military service, Reverend David and Jane say. He was a kind and loving father, his Isaiah's son Robert Fassett recounts, who spanked me when I misbehaved. He taught me the trade of carpentry. His favorite hymns were "The Gospel Train is Coming," and "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise." He went for the golden rule. Father was concerned for the needy, the sick, and for community progress. He always had cider to give to folks. He walked a lot for exercise until he was 100 years old. L.K. Henry, a longtime retired educator, says that as a member of St. Paul United Methodist Church, Isaiah served as class leader, steward, and janitor. The young people loved him. He told them stories of Army life. He never missed a Memorial Day parade. When younger, he marched every step. For years, he rode a horse until he was elderly. Then he rode in an auto, enjoying that very much. All those years, he wore his Grand Army fedora and dressed in the old uniform he brought home and kept for each year's parade. He died peacefully at his Branch Street home he had built with the help of his son. He repaired and built many houses. He liked to till the soil and raise watermelons, corn, and vegetables. And Gwendolyn Brown of Wilmington, Delaware, tells us that when I went to visit grandmother, I remember Uncle Zia best on his last Memorial Days when he was too old to be in the procession. He would stand at attention on his porch, dressed in uniform, and saluted as they passed by his home.